All right, so Helima, we might as well start where we just ended right there, the Iran-U.S. nuclear talk. So the U.S. drawing a red line when it comes to Iran. First, what does it mean about when it comes to the future of the nuclear program, that red line the U.S. is trying to draw? And also, what are the ramifications for the oil market?
Well, Frank, there have been 4 rounds of talks between the United States and Iran, 3 taking place in Oman, 1 in Rome. And it really comes down to what are the terms the U.S. are going to offer the Iranians. If we offer them something that looks like the 2015 agreement, low-level uranium enrichment, consistent with the civilian nuclear program, enhanced inspection regime, that is something the Iranians will likely take. They've lost their major proxy, Hezbollah. Air defense systems are weaker. Their economy is reeling. So if you offer them something that looks like 2015, likely to get them to sign on the dotted line. The problem is that there's a lot of pressure on Capitol Hill from allies like Israel to essentially say Iran must dismantle its entire program, ship out all the centrifuges, ship out the missiles, and only then to talk about sanctions relief. And if they don't do it, talk about military action. So it's really coming down to what is the U.S. term sheet. The Iranians are clear. They will have something consistent with the civilian nuclear program. They are not going to dismantle and ship out their program like the Libyans did in 2003.
I think you're pointing out that the Libyans dismantled their nuclear program, and then their leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was later killed. So you're saying that Iran, seeing that, isn't going to do the same thing? That's
not a great precedent for the Iranians. And every time we talk about the Libyan example, you brought up in the Arab Spring in 2011, Muammar Gaddafi ran into problems with an uprising in his own country, and then there was a UN-backed regime change operation that ended in his death. So from the Iranian standpoint, they do want to retain some form of a nuclear condo option. They don't want to give up the entire program. There's some discussion about whether they could do what UAE does, which is import fuel for their reactors and forego domestic enrichment. But again, it's really going to come down to what is the United States prepared to offer the Iranians? And then another issue, which also pertains to Russia as well, Frank, is a lot of the sanctions that were done on Iran and a significant number of sanctions on Russia were put in place by Congress. And so President Trump, in both cases of an Iran deal or a Russia deal, would have to seek congressional approval for the removal of some portion of the sanctions architecture.
Let's get to those Russia talks as well. So the White House basically putting out that if Russia isn't taking the peace talks seriously based on their terms, more sanctions could be on the way. What could that potentially mean for the oil market in general? I'm looking at the oil market over the last week. Not a lot of action when you look at the week in total. Like lots of ups and downs, a lot of reaction, including to the idea of more Iranian oil being on the market, but essentially flat over this last week.
Flat over the last week. And when it comes to Russia, I mean, the issue is, Frank, as you know, Russian oil has not been majorly disrupted by sanctions. In fact, the price cap regime that was put in place was really designed to enable Russian barrels to move to countries like India, like China, after they were locked out of the EU, essentially allowing service providers to move those barrels if the oil was at or below the price cap. So we haven't had a major Russian supply disruption. And so the question is, when President Trump talks about additional sanctions, what would be the U.S. rigor when it comes to enforcement? Same thing with Iran. Frank, as you know, President Trump has made a number of recent statements saying no Iranian barrels on the market. We're taking them to zero. And yet Iranian barrels remain on the market. So it really comes down to a question of what is really the firepower the U.S. would put behind an effort to try to remove both Russian and Iranian barrels, because President Trump also likes a low oil price. This has been one of his good news stories on the economy, has been lower oil prices.
So, Helima, you're leading me to my next question. The president has talked quite a bit, very proud of the idea that oil and gas prices have been lower. We actually heard Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talk about that during the Meet the Press interview yesterday. So how much is the idea of lower oil prices going to influence the foreign policy, if at all?
Well, again, is it in the interest of President Trump to really try to make significant reductions of Iranian exports, of Russian oil exports? Certainly the Biden administration really privileged keeping oil on the market. And so there was a sense that maybe they didn't go as hard as they should have done or could have done on Iran sanctions enforcement because they wanted to keep Iranian barrels on the market. They wanted to keep it well supplied. And again, when it came to Russia, they came up with price caps to ensure that those barrels that that were going to Europe and locked out of Europe could go to Asia. So it's going to be a real question about what are the priorities of President Trump. But then we also have the issue of U.S. producers. And as you know, a number of U.S. producers are becoming more vocal, saying this is not a great oil price for the American oil industry.